An American pilot who was shot down over Germany in World War II once gave an interview about his experience as a prisoner in Germany for the last months of the war in the large Moosburg prison complex in Bavaria. The last thing the pilot told the interviewer? "I was lucky. Moosburg was no fun, but it was a picnic compared to what the guys captured by the Japanese went through. They went through hell." The American pilot was lucky, not only because he hadn't gone down in the Pacific Theater, but because he wasn't a Soviet prisoner. In that case, there's a good chance he would not have survived German captivity. Under 4% of Western Allied POWs perished in German captivity. Over 2 million Soviet POWs died or were killed in German prison, concentration and extermination camps. Nearly 60% of all Soviets captured by the Germans during World War II. On the other side of the world, the Japanese had no preference for American, British, Australian, and Dutch POWs like many Germans did. Just under 30% of all Western prisoners of the Japanese did not survive, and the survival rate for Chinese and other Asian prisoners was much lower. Of the many infamous and deadly incidents that came with being a prisoner of the Japanese was the Burma Railway. Welcome to History on Fleek, where today we're going to tell you a little about the Burma Railway, or as it's better known, the Railway of Death. Japan attacked Thailand on the day after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Having already established control of Vietnam and Cambodia, the Japanese needed to secure their flank from any attacks coming from the direction of British India. The fight between the Thais and the Japanese was short, with the Thai government suing for peace in a battle they knew they could not win. For their part, the Japanese could not afford to leave tens of thousands of occupation troops in Thailand and face a possible guerrilla war in its jungles. The Thai government signed a non-aggression pact and gave the Japanese favorable trade terms. Away from the capital, Bangkok, and the western part of the country, most Thais never saw a Japanese soldier. A few weeks later, the Japanese launched an invasion of the British territory of Burma, and within a short time drove the British and Imperial troops, in this case meaning mostly Indian soldiers, back to the border of India, where fierce battles would take place in 1944 and result in Japanese defeat. But until that time, the Japanese ruled Burma with an iron fist, at least the southern parts of it. Their main goal was to run a railway line from Bangkok to the Burmese port city of Molmyne, now referred to as Molamyine. This would make it much easier to run supplies from the Thai or Vietnamese coasts into Burma. It would avoid many miles of potentially costly sea travel in terms of oil, ships, and men, and allow the Japanese to ship Burmese goods like oil, tungsten, tin, lead, and emeralds out. The problem was that the planned railway ran through some of the most forbidding and deadly jungle on the planet. Not only were there sections of Burma and Thailand where the Japanese planned to build covered with thick vegetation, they were also covered with hills, rivers, and very few roads and bridges. Before anyone could even begin building a railway, jungle needed to be cleared, passes needed to be blown through hillsides, and bridges erected over rivers. And then there was the weather. In June, July, and August, the rainy or monsoon season, it's not unheard of for sections of Burma to receive 47 inches of rain a month. On average, that's over an inch of rain every day, for 90 days or more. That also means that Burma is humid. Burma laughs at Florida humidity, especially in the pre-monsoon months of February to May, when temperatures reach 100 degrees Fahrenheit or more on a regular basis in most of the country. September through December is the coolest time of year in the area where the railway was to be built. The average is 85 degrees. And just because the rain doesn't come down like Niagara Falls doesn't mean it doesn't rain. A lot. You gotta be tough to live in Burma, and that's just taking the weather into account. Many of you watching this likely have experience playing sports of some kind, or doing physical labor at work. Imagine your most tiring day. Now add 6 to 8 hours to it. Throw in 100 degree Fahrenheit heat, sporadic murderous sunshine, and then throw in rain so heavy you can barely take a deep breath. At this point, the humidity is close to 100%, even when it's not raining. Remember gasping for air during the first weeks of football practice in the summer? Triple that severity. That's just the weather. Though a few American POWs did work on the Burma Railway, most of the Allied troops who were forced by the Japanese to labor through the jungle were British, Australian, Indian, and Dutch. Approximately 60,000 Allied POWs worked on the railway, which they soon gave a nickname to, the Railway of Death. Because military records were so much better than the national records of the time, no one is quite sure of the numbers of Burmese, Chinese, Thai, Malay, and Javanese workers who also worked on the railway. Most historians believe that 200,000 is an accurate figure. Obviously, the POWs were forced to work on the railroad. Many of the Chinese and others had been forcibly drafted into the Japanese labor force, but a considerable number of the romusha, the Japanese word for laborer, had been enticed by the Japanese with promises of good pay, housing, and medical care, all of which were lacking in wartime Asia. After the romusha boarded the trains, ships, or trucks transporting them to the worksite, they soon learned that all of those promises were lies. Both Allied POWs and Asian laborers taken in the Pacific were sent to the railway on what have become known as the Hell Ships. The experience of the Hell Ships is its own separate story, but suffice it to say that on them thirst, hunger, madness, beatings, and outright executions happened on a regular basis. Worse still, the Japanese did not mark the ships with the required POW painted on the hulls and decks, and 14 ships carrying POWs and civilians were sunk by the Allies. They had no idea what was on board. More than 20,000 POWs and an unknown number of workers were killed as a result. The men who survived the Hell Ships went on to another hell, the Burma Railroad. Speedo! That was the word that haunted the sleep of the men who worked on the railway, even long after the war. Speedo was the Japanese way of telling workers to hurry up, one of the few English words they knew. If you've watched some of our other videos, you know that for a variety of reasons, the Japanese military committed war crimes on a large scale during World War II. On the railway, with pressure from Tokyo to finish quickly, most Japanese troops were either sadistic, insensitive to suffering, or both. Of course, there were good guards, and many railway survivors have mentioned them in their published memoirs, but they were rare. Some of the worst guards weren't Japanese at all. They were Korean. Korea had been taken over by the Japanese in 1910. And many Korean men were forced into the Japanese army, where they were treated as second class. There's an American saying, runs downhill, and the Koreans in Burma became notorious for taking out their frustrations on the prisoners, and to prove something to the Japanese, sometimes for more privileges, better pay, leave, etc. Beatings, beheadings, deprivation of water, food, and medical care were all daily occurrences. Men who were beaten within an inch of their lives were often forced to continue work. Many of them died in the attempt. When they could, other prisoners would try to help the victims, and depending on the circumstances, some of them did. But more often than not, they would have been beaten or punished later. For instance, being put in a hot box in the blazing sun for 2 or 3 days with very little or no water. Many of the survivors owe their lives to the native Burmese and Thai people, especially women and children that secretly gave them water or fruit. Aside from the very real threat of being bitten by one of the many species of poisonous snakes in the region, Burma's jungle and the conditions the men lived in caused widespread disease. Malaria, diphtheria, cholera, scurvy, and beriberi, the latter two caused by vitamin C and vitamin B1 thiamine deficiencies due to poor diet. Another of the dangers of the jungle was jungle rot, more formally known as a tropical ulcer. This is not athlete's foot. It's the same as trench foot. Except on the railway and in the jungles worldwide, small cuts or lesions become infected and begin to rot the flesh, usually from the inside out. Untreated, tropical ulcers can lead to amputation and death. Jungle rot must be scraped out and disinfected. Most of the few doctors present among the Allied POWs used spoons with sharpened edges while the victim was held down. The railway was built by hand, with a few exceptions when the few steel bridges were put in using cranes. Hammers, hand drills, homemade pegs and stakes, and sheer strength and determination built the railway, which, when finished, ran some 250 miles. Far short of its planned length due to the progress of the war, Allied bombing, and lack of resources. Though from 1943, when it was finished, until the end of the war, that span did carry Japanese troops and supplies. In 1957, the railway became famous once again when Columbia Pictures made the movie Bridge on the River Kwai, based on the fictional novel by a man who had never been there. For a variety of reasons, including the non-existent American hero and the near treason of the commanding Allied officer, played by Alec Guinness of Obi-Wan Kenobi fame, the survivors of the Railway of Death refused to see the movie and hated it until the day they died. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.